Adam Cartwright and Hoss Cartwright were brothers on Bonanza, but they couldn't have been more different from one another. Adam, the architectural genius with a high level of education, and Hoss, the kind-hearted and gentle giant. The actors who played them, Pernell Roberts and Dan Blocker, were just as different from one another behind the scenes. The show's writers and co-stars frequently found themselves in conflict with Purnell, who was notorious for his outspoken criticism of the show. While everything was going on, Dan, who enjoyed his role as Hoss but detested the fame that it brought him, sought consolation in a location that was not in Hollywood. And even more significantly, their lives went in different directions after Blocker passed away unexpectedly at the age of 43. While the crowd were in mourning, Roberts made a decision that was unexpected. There was no sign of him at the funeral. Was it resentment, grief, or something more profound that kept him away from the situation? The lives of Pernell Roberts and Dan Blocker were full of unexpected turns, twists, and unusual routes that helped form them into the stars that we would later come to know. This is something that you should know about them before they became household names on Bonanza. It's very incredible to consider how drastically different their childhoods were from one another. And yet, for some reason, fate brought them together on one of the most memorable series in the history of television. I will take you back to the place where everything started. His love for the theater was profound, and Pernell Roberts, who would later become Adam Cartwright, had a strong passion for performing. It was in 1949 when he made his debut on stage at the Olney Theater in Maryland, which is considered to be his first major performance. Take into consideration the fact that he was young and full of ambition when he was cast in The Man Who Came to Dinner starring Moss Hart and Kitty Carlisle. Only the beginning had begun, but he was already demonstrating signs of promise. That was the beginning of Purnell's journey. He was a versatile actor who appeared in a variety of parts, such as Dan in Night Must Fall and Alfred Doolittle in Pygmalion. In addition to his brilliance, the individual possessed a wide range of skills, and it was clear that he was destined for a significant role. When Purnell reached the year 1952, he was prepared to pursue even more ambitious goals, so he packed his belongings and moved to New York City. Purnell did not waste any time in getting involved in the theater scene in New York during the 1950s, which was the place to be for anyone who aspired to make it in the theater. He was a performer who worked off Broadway, appearing in Shakespearean plays and operas with individual acts. Do you think you could picture him in the role of Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet or Macbeth walking across the stage together? In 1955, he was even honored with a Drama Desk Award for his work in that role. No easy task at all. It was during his tenure with the American Shakespeare Festival that he gained a deep appreciation for classical parts, yet he was not hesitant to explore other genres of acting. He acted in a wide variety of plays, ranging from Twelfth Night to The Merchant of Venice, and he imparted his own unique style to each of the characters he played. The television industry also came calling, as it frequently does, and Purnell made his first appearance on the Kraft Television Theater in the year 1956. If you were watching television at the time, you might have seen him make an appearance on programs such as Whirlybirds or Cheyenne. Although he was starting to seem more and more like a known face, the stage was still where his heart was. He continued to maintain a healthy balance between film, television, and theater even after he signed a deal with Columbia Pictures in 1957. In 1958, he made his debut in the film Desire Under the Elms, which was one of his first roles, in which he portrayed the role of one of Burl Ives' sons. It was not lost on anyone that Purnell possessed a talent for portraying characters that were both intense and multifaceted. Around the same time, Dan Blocker was figuring out his own path in a world that was considerably different from the one he was in. When compared to Purnell's route to fame, Dan's was not as straightforward. Although he was a huge guy, and it was difficult to miss him, he had a kind and compassionate spirit. Prior to his career in Hollywood, Dan served in the military during the Korean War as a draftee. As an infantry sergeant, he served in the military, which was not an easy position to hold. The individual participated in hostilities and was even awarded a Purple Heart for his valor. Those experiences must have played a significant influence in shaping the courage and generosity that he ultimately brought to his character as Hoss Cartwright, when you think about it from that perspective. Following the conclusion of the war, Dan went back to regular life and began experimenting with acting. In 1957, he appeared in a short film titled Outer Space Jitters, which was presented by the Three Stooges. Do you agree that it is amusing to consider him playing a part of that nature? On the other hand, Dan possessed a wonderful sense of humor and was not afraid to play roles that were strange. There were episodes of Gunsmoke in which he appeared, all the way up to The Rifleman in Cheyenne. In Richard Diamond, Private Detective, he initially played a rodeo performer, which is considered to be one of his more memorable early performances. In the course of his career, he portrayed a wide range of characters, including blacksmiths, bartenders, and cattlemen, and gradually established himself as a dependable character actor. In the meantime, Pernell and Dan were heading in the same direction without their knowledge. During the latter half of the 1950s, Purnell had established himself as a reputable actor by performing in a variety of parts, including those in Broadway musicals, guest appearances on television, and supporting roles in films. While this was going on, Dan was establishing himself as a prominent figure in westerns. He possessed a roughness that was very much in line with the genre, but he also provided a tenderness that set him apart from the rest of the cast. During the year 1959, both men experienced pivotal experiences in their professional lives that would eventually bring them to the same location. Purnell made an appearance in the movie Ride Lonesome, in which he played a multifaceted outlaw alongside Randolph Scott. It was hailed as one of the most impressive roles he had ever played, and the critics praised his performance. His ability to give even the most grittier of characters a sense of depth was demonstrated by this achievement. During the same time period, Dan appeared in the pilot episode of The Rebel, in which he played the character of a rancher who was experiencing difficulties. Even though it wasn't a particularly significant job, it demonstrated his capacity to bring vulnerability to challenging roles that were larger than life. And then Bonanza appeared. During the process of casting a family drama that would take place in the Wild West, the show's creator, David Duertort, was putting together a cast. He was looking for performers that could contribute something special to the Cartwright family, people with powerful personalities who could stand out on their own while also functioning well as a unit through their performances. Adam Cartwright, the oldest of the Cartwright children, was a logical choice for Purnell because of his dominating demeanor and extensive stage experience. You could not help but feel that he could hold his own on a vast ranch since he exuded an air of power and possessed a quiet focus. On the other hand, Dan was chosen to play the role of Hoss, the kind-hearted giant who has a brilliant heart. Beyond Dan's physical stature, Duertort recognized that he possessed a unique quality that set him apart from other people. The host needed to be warm and friendly, someone that the crowd would cheer for. And Dan was the ideal candidate for the job. It's almost as if he was destined to play the part. And just like that, everything started to fall into place. As they prepared to stroll onto the set of Bonanza, two men who had very different origins were about to make television history. Pernell Roberts and Dan Blocker were ready to make history. They had no idea that their lives and careers were about to undergo a transformation that would last a lifetime. In 1959, when it first aired, Bonanza immediately became a popular show. There was nothing typical about this Western. There were more than simply gunfights and outlaws involved, and smoky bars and hotels. In the midst of the breathtaking scenery of the Nevada wilderness, Bonanza featured tales about the importance of family, morals, and standing up for what is right. In addition to being ranchers, the Cartwright family, who served as the show's central focus, were also more than that. They were representations of bravery, generosity, and unwavering commitment to doing what was right, even when it was challenging. The time that Pernell Roberts and Dan Blocker spent on the show was not without its difficulties, despite the fact that they formed an essential component of that complex family dynamic. Adam Cartwright was portrayed by Purnell. It is the oldest son. Adam was distinct from his brothers in that he was well-educated, intellectual, and possessing a wealth of ideas. His character, who was an architectural engineer, frequently gave the family with the intellectual capacity to find solutions to their issues. Through his portrayal of Adam, Pernell offered a level of seriousness that was a natural fit for the role. However, as the show progressed, Purnell began to struggle with the limitations of both the character and the show itself. Working in the theater, where each role was new and thrilling, was something he was accustomed to doing. Having to play Adam week after week while wearing the same outfit and performing in the same location did not feel satisfying to him. When it came to venting his frustrations, Purnell did not hold back. He referred to the show as junk television and blasted it for its lack of depth on multiple occasions. Additionally, he believed that the stories were overly simplistic and did not address significant topics such as racism or social justice. He went so far as to quip that being on Bonanza was like having Isaac Stern and Lawrence Welk in the same room together. That was the extent of his distaste for being a part of something that he considered to be beneath his capabilities. Nevertheless, the scripts were not the only thing that Purnell had a problem with. It irritated him that his character as a mature adult in his 30s, he was required to inquire about his father, Ben Cartwright, who was portrayed by Lorne Greene, for authorization to engage in certain activities. During interviews, he referred to the connection as adolescent and stated that it was illogical for three adult men to rely on their father for everything. He was dissatisfied since he had the impression that his role was not making progress. It was important to him that the stories he was performing in had greater depth, more obstacles, and more opportunities to test his acting abilities. Despite the fact that Purnell had difficulty with Bonanza's direction, Hoss Cartwright was a part that Dan Blocker enthusiastically embraced. The sitcom revolved around Hoss, a huge friendly guy with a good soul. He was the show's heart. It is difficult to envision anyone else playing the role of Hoss, because Dan brought such a great deal of genuine warmth and comedy to the role. One of his boyhood friends, who was rough on the outside but kind on the inside, served as the inspiration for the character, and it turned out to be a wonderful selection. Also, Dan contributed his own ideology to the role that he was playing. It was once said that he portrayed the role of Hoss with a quote in mind: "On this earth, we will only travel through this path once. Now is the time for us to show any kindness that we are capable of showing." This show of goodwill was evident in each and every scenario. When it came to helping strangers, advocating for the underdog, and demonstrating the more compassionate side of the Cartwrights, Hoss was the one who did it. Fans adored him for it, and his fellow actors felt the same way. The set, however, was not always a smooth place to work. In 1962, Pernell and Dan were involved in a terrifying catastrophe that occurred while they were filming an episode of the show called The Dowry. At that moment, Purnell's horse stumbled and fell when they were riding horses downhill on a trail that was covered in muck. Dan, who was following closely behind, was unable to dodge the mess and ended up falling as well. Both men made an effort to escape the situation, although they were still injured. Dan had a broken collarbone and a separated shoulder, while Purnell suffered a sprained neck with the injury. In order for Dan to continue filming while his arm was in a sling, the production had to make some adjustments to the script. As a result of the accident, not only were there bodily scars. According to Pernell, this appeared to be even another cause for him to want to leave the show. Already in a state of dissatisfaction, he was forced to contend with the additional burden of an injury. The accident was even thought to be the final straw for him by many who were critical of him. It was obvious that he was no longer invested in Bonanza, despite the fact that he continued to appear on the show for a few more seasons. There was a difficult dynamic amongst the cast members behind the scenes. Because of his outspoken temperament, Purnell frequently found himself in conflict with the writers and producers. It was never a problem for him to express his viewpoints, even if doing so meant upsetting the status quo. On the other hand, Dan could be described as more laid back and got along well with everyone. He was a fan favorite on set due to his hilarious sense of humor and his large personality. They are distinct from one another. The two actors have mutual respect for one another. It's possible that they weren't the best of friends, but they worked well together and brought their characters to life in a way that audiences could relate to. In the meantime, Dan discovered other methods to channel his energy, while Purnell's displeasure with the show continued to grow. He was a cinematic star, appearing in films such as Come Blow Your Horn, alongside Frank Sinatra, and he was also instrumental in the establishment of a network of Bonanza steakhouse restaurants. In order to promote the company, he utilized his popularity as Hass by appearing in ads and attending personal trips to the franchises. This was a very astute approach. In addition, it demonstrated how much he enjoyed playing his role on Bonanza. Despite the fact that Purnell did not always believe that the show went far enough, the show itself did not shy away from addressing significant subjects. The manner in which episodes such as Enter Thomas Bowers dealt with the issue of racism was revolutionary for the time period. Within the context of that narrative, Hoss is instrumental in defending an African-American opera singer from racism in Virginia City. The Cartwrights were shown to be courageous in this episode, which demonstrated their commitment to doing what is right. There are many further episodes, such as The Wish and The Fear Merchants. In addition, it tackled issues of racism and inequality, gradually expanding the bounds of what a Western power might do. Nevertheless, Purnell was of the opinion that the presentation could have accomplished more. He yearned for more profound narratives that conveyed more meaning. In 1965, he came to the conclusion that he had had enough. Following the completion of his 6-year contract, he resigned from the show, so leaving behind one of the most popular television series. Through the use of the justification that he had relocated, his character Adam was eliminated from the story. In subsequent episodes, Adam was addressed quite a few times. Nevertheless, Purnell never came back. On the other side, Dan spent his entire life with Bonanza up until the unexpected passing of his father in 1972. He continued to be an essential component of the show, contributing humor and warmth to each and every episode. The fans had a strong affection for Hoss, and Dan's portrayal of him left an indelible mark. It is possible that Purnell and Dan had distinct experiences while working on Bonanza, yet they both contributed to the success of the show in their own unique ways. The show became a cultural touchstone not only because of the interesting stories it told, but also because of the morals and ethics it advocated for. Either because of Adam's high level of intelligence or Hass's generous nature, The Cartwright brothers exemplified the very best that individuals are capable of being. However, their relationship was also complicated, much like the most of their time spent on Bonanza. The news of Dan's passing in 1972 came as a shock to everyone, including Purnell themselves. Following Dan's passing, a number of issues were raised, and fans continue to be curious about them to this day. It is unclear why Pernell Roberts did not show up to the funeral of Dan Blocker. Dan Blocker had gallbladder surgery when he abruptly passed away from a pulmonary embolism. He was only 43 years old at the time of his death. The cast of Bonanza was left inconsolable after his passing, which sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. Dan was the most important character in the show, both on and off the screen. He contributed humor, friendliness, and a certain warmth to the role of Hoss Cartwright, which resulted in him becoming a big fan favorite. In the world outside of the screen, Dan was known for his unassuming demeanor and his distaste to being in the spotlight. He was not cut out for fame. Even though he enjoyed performing, he detested the attention that it brought him. In 1970, he even relocated his family to Switzerland in an effort to get away from it. Settling down in the breathtaking lake country that he had fell in love with while on vacation. The fact that Dan relocated to Switzerland spoke a great deal about the kind of man he was. In order to provide a peaceful environment for his family, he desired to be away from the noise and bustle of Hollywood. Once he expressed his feelings of shame at the ease with which his career had progressed in comparison to the challenges faced by other performers. Even though he was successful, Dan never lost his modesty. Despite the sparkle and splendor, he seemed unconcerned about it. He had a deep concern for his family as well as the principles that he held dear. Because of his modesty, those who knew him found his passing to be even more difficult. Sadly, it wasn't just the passing of a talented actor. We had suffered the death of a person who was actually good. Following the announcement of Dan's passing, the cast and crew of Bonanza were left in utter disbelief. The actor who played the role of Little Joe, Michael Landon, was particularly upset. After some time had passed, he revealed that every time he felt the need to shed tears during a scene, he would think about Dan's passing. The choice to address Hoss's absence from the show was taken by the producers, which was an uncommon decision. They did not remake the role or silently write him out of the story, rather. They acknowledged his passing. A first in the history of television, although the story did not go into specifics, it was evident that Hoss had passed away, and the Cartwright family was in a state of mourning. It was a courageous decision, and it demonstrated how much Dan mattered to the show because of his presence. Nevertheless, Pernell Roberts was conspicuously absent at the funeral service for Dan.